Not awkward. It was the shared quiet of two souls who knew the cost of speaking too soon. Cole watched her fuss with the kettle, saw the small tremor in her hands when she poured water into a cup, and knew she was trying to disguise the way fear still lived in her bones. He wanted to tell her that he wasn't good, that men like him don't get to deliver miracles, that his saving her had been as much about rewriting his own mistakes as it was about giving her and the boy a chance. But words have a way of turning thin when you need them most, so he sat instead, the fire's light making his face older, and she sat beside him, their shoulders brushing in a way that felt more like confession than comfort. "You've lost people," she said after a while, not asking but knowing, and he nodded once, a small, deliberate motion that cracked open a silence large enough for both their ghosts to enter. The wind sighed through the house, bringing with it the faint scent of rain from somewhere far off, a storm building, maybe tomorrow, maybe in a week, and for the first time, Clara realized that storms didn't always come to destroy. Sometimes they came to wash the world clean. The baby stirred and whimpered. She rose to hush him, and when she turned back, Cole was still staring at the window. His good hand curled loosely around the edge of the table as if anchoring himself. "You did what you had to," she said softly, and though she wasn't sure if she meant tonight or years before, it didn't matter. He nodded again, almost imperceptibly, and something unspoken settled between them, something heavier than trust, lighter than forgiveness, but real enough to steady the air. In that quiet, where the fire's crackle spoke louder than confession, their bond began, not in gratitude or promise or any false purity, but in the honest, imperfect understanding that both had been broken by the same kind of world, and both had chosen, against reason, to keep living in it. Outside, the stars watched without judgment, and inside the burned-out ranch, two people, no longer strangers, not yet saved, sat close enough that the silence itself felt like mercy. If you've ridden this far with us, tip your hat and hit subscribe to keep the campfire burning. Every day, we bring another tale from the old frontier, of grit, loss, and the kind of courage the West was built on. Keep your powder dry and your heart wide open to the horizon. Silas rode back into Dry Creek before dawn, blood soaking through the torn sleeve of his coat, jaw clenched so tight that each breath came like a curse. The town, half asleep, stirred at the sound of his horse's uneven gait, and by the time he reached the saloon, the door swung open to reveal a few men who knew better than to ask questions before coffee or daylight. But tonight, or this morning, Silas's rage made both irrelevant. He threw a coin purse onto the table, its contents spilling out in a clatter that silenced the room, and said through gritted teeth, "Danner's alive." The name was a spell, an old ghost unburied, and every man in that room stiffened because Cole Tanner was not just a name in these parts. He was a legend with a body count, a man who'd once ridden under Silas's own command before deciding that blood bought nothing worth keeping. Silas's face twisted as he poured whiskey over his wound, hissing when it burned, then slammed the bottle down hard enough to crack the glass. "He killed my men," he growled, "and took what's mine. I want him brought in, or buried. Doesn't matter which." The bartender, a nervous man with more ears than courage, spread the news before the bottle hit the floor. By midday, the rumor had become a bounty, and by nightfall, the bounty had turned into a promise whispered across every poker table, every campfire, every outlaw's grin. $10,000 for Cole Tanner, dead or alive, and no questions about the widow or the child. The men who came sniffing around were old names with bad habits, Wyatt Coates, who had once shot a man for stepping on his hat, Amos Fitz, whose laugh sounded like a shovel hitting rock, and others, the old gang who had once called Cole brother before he'd broken from them and tried to build something softer than violence. They came now not out of loyalty but hunger, drawn by coin and by the satisfaction of rewriting the story that had left them in his shadow. Silas fed them whiskey and hate, painting Cole as a traitor who'd sold them out, a man who'd stolen blood money and gone soft. By the time the sun fell, they were saddled and ready, 8 riders heading out under a sky that promised no mercy. Back at Eagle's Rest, Cole felt the storm before he saw it. There are certain kinds of silence the land gives you when something's coming, a stillness too deliberate, too weighted, and he recognized it the way old soldiers recognized the smell of powder even decades later. He found Clara at the well, her sleeves rolled, her eyes distant, and when she asked what he was thinking, he didn't lie. "They'll come," he said, the words flat and sure. She stopped, bucket half raised, and looked at him as if searching his face for doubt. But there was none. He'd been running since the fire, running from graves, from names, from debts, and in her eyes, for the first time, he saw how small that running looked beside the life they'd built in scraps. He could pack the horse, leave under the cover of darkness, take her and the baby far from Dry Creek's reach. But running was a circle, not a road, and he was too tired to walk in circles anymore. We could go, Clara whispered, not pleading, just offering the map of fear. We could, he said, and meant it, but it wouldn't stop them. They'd just find someone else to bleed. He'd seen it too often. Violence was not satisfied by victory. It needed repetition. The men who hunted him were bound not by law but by the rhythm of revenge, and he was the one who had taught them the tempo. That night, he took inventory, bullets, rope, water, and moved through the ranch like a man preparing for confession, each gesture deliberate, each shadow noted. He oiled the rifle with slow precision, the same care another man might take to polish a wedding band, and as the fire in the hearth thinned to ash, he felt the strange calm of acceptance settle over him. Outside, the wind shifted, bringing the faint echo of laughter from somewhere far off, the kind of laughter that only comes from men who believe they're already owed the ending. Cole stepped to the porch, lit a cigarette, and let the smoke curl into the cold. He could almost hear the hoofbeats already, carried on the breath of the land. The thought didn't scare him. What frightened him, what truly carved its way into his ribs, was the part of himself that wasn't angry anymore, only ready. The day before the storm broke, the air over Eagle's Rest held the same weight as a church before confession, every sound smaller, every movement deliberate, the world itself pausing to take measure of what was about to be lost or saved. Cole Tanner moved through the house like a craftsman preparing for judgment, his hands steady, his mind narrowed to the clean simplicity of work, checking cartridges, setting lanterns in places where light could blind more than it revealed, hammering shutters into place so the wind couldn't betray them. The barn became a fortress, the corral a killing ground, and the open field that had once been the heart of his rebuilding now waited to be scarred again. Clara found him by the porch, sweat running down his jaw, and when he told her to pack the baby and ride east with it on, she only shook her head, her voice soft but unyielding. "You gave us a chance," she said. "Now it's our turn." There was no drama in her words, only the quiet conviction of someone who had finally grown tired of being moved by other men's fear. He wanted to argue, to tell her he'd already buried too many ghosts, but something in her gaze, steel and mercy twined, made him stop. So they worked together in silence. She filled buckets with water from the well, lined up jars of kerosene, wrapped the baby's cradle in cloth to muffle sound. Night fell without preamble. The sky bruised purple and black, and the first torchlight appeared on the ridge. 6 riders, their silhouettes sharp against the low stars, the wind carrying with it the sound of hooves like a drumbeat counting down the inevitable. Clara took Eli into the cellar, whispering a prayer not for safety but for courage. Cole stood in the doorway of the ruined ranch, rifle in hand, the heat of the lantern beside him painting his shadow along and skeletal against the wall. The riders fanned out, the glow of their torches turning the field into a wavering sea of gold and shadow. Silas Greeley rode at the front, his arms still bound, eyes burning with a fever that was half vengeance, half disbelief that any man could stand against the ledger he represented. "Denner," he called, his voice carrying like a sermon. "You can come out clean, or I can write your name in fire." Cole stepped forward into the open, calm as a man walking to a gallows he built himself. Mark, her throat tight with an old, patient suspicion that had kept her alive through nights of cold and men with lamps. She said only, "You bought us. What do you want?" And the question hung between them like a rope neither dared tug. He did not answer with promises or plans. He did not speak of work or pay or the finer points of mercy. He only moved with a careful economy, untied his horse with hands that trembled just enough to be human, steadied the steed and offered the woman a seat as if he knew how to hold weight without breaking it. The baby whimpered, then settled against Clara's shoulder, warm and bewildered. When the horse took the dust road out of Dry Creek, the town narrowed behind them into a smear of heat and stunned faces, the auctioneer's voice a thin memory in the square. Between Clara and the rider there grew silence as vast and deliberate as the prairie. No small talk, no clumsy reassurances, only the slow rhythm of hoop beats and the whisper of blanket against saddle. Each sound became a measure of the distance they had already traveled in the miles yet unspoken. Her mind catalogued reasons to fear, debts unpaid, men who kept score with bullets, a ledger of favors and grudges that never forgave a loose end. The thought of the man who had stood at the platform, their jaws hard, their coin colder, left a sour bile rising in her. She remembered the ledger her husband had kept. Neat columns of names and numbers that meant nothing now, ink smeared with blood, and how, the night he was taken, someone had told her there were rules to this land, a code that men like those kept, and that mercy was a luxury taxed by violence. Yet the man's hands had been gentle when he handed her the reins. His face, half hidden beneath a brim, had told stories in the lines around his mouth, stories of loss, of things fetched too late, of a kind of repentance that did not demand in ceremony. She watched him out of the corner of her eye, measured his silences like stones, wondering whether this was a rescue or a trap, and found that suspicion and gratitude could be braided together into a strange, trembling thing that felt almost like hope. He rode with his chin tucked, eyes on a horizon she could not see. Sometimes he reached down and adjusted the blanket about the baby, and those small gestures read to her like confessions. When at last he spoke, it was to name a place, no promise, just the direction, Eagle's Rest, he said, voice low as gravel, as if the name itself were an apology. The syllables settled on her like dust, unfamiliar but not hostile, and she asked nothing more, because questions in Dry Creek had a way of inviting answers that scored. As the town receded, the landscape changed from splintered boards to open scrub, wind shaping the earth into the long, slow grammar of the West. The sun leaned down and painted the world the color of old bones, and Clara felt her fear loosen in the face of the endless. In that vastness her thoughts wandered, not to coin or contracts, but to the baby's small fingers, to a laugh she wanted to hear again, to the stubbornness of the human heart. The rider kept his distance, not aloof but deliberate, as though giving her room to make her own decisions in a life that had lately been decided by other hands. At dusk they stopped by a wind-bent cottonwood and shared a thin stew warmed over a small, careful fire. He spoke then in fragments, no confessions, no grand histories, just enough to paint the edges of who he was. Once a rancher, once a man with a name people used without flinching, once someone who had known the price of leaving a debt unpaid. Her questions probed and he answered in the measured way of a man who had learned that truth is best doled out in small pieces. The baby slept between them, a warm, steady presence, and the silence returned, but it was different now. Not the loaded, expectant hush of the auction square, but the companionable quiet of two people bearing the same small, sacred fear. That kindness was thin and rare, that mercy could be cruel when it arrived late. Clara did not thank him then. Words felt suspect, easily turned into chains, but when she watched him close his eyes by the fire, shoulders slack against the night, she felt a tremor of something like trust bloom, tentative and wary, the first fragile root of a bond forged in necessity and quiet bravery. They rode west until the town was nothing but a smear of boards and gossip behind them, the horizon the hard line that swallowed the sun. The land between Dry Creek and wherever hope might still be found was a ledger of everything that had been burned, grizzed off, or simply forgotten, skeleton stumps of mesquite, the bleached drips of cattle that had once been counted, a sky so wide it made you feel both small and unsurpassed. And Cole Tanner kept his hand near the baby's blanket as if the sleeve could steady a future. The child, Eli, Clara murmured once, half to teach the name to the wind and half to pin it with something softer than circumstance, was small and fierce in that way children are when the world leans wrong, fingers curled like tiny tools, eyelids dark and slow, a mouth that opened for milk and wonder and closed against the taste of fear. Cole stole glances not because he was unfamiliar with responsibility, but because the sight of a living smallness unspooled something inside him he had tied up long ago. The memory of another child's laugh folded into sunlight, of a woman whose apron had smelled of bread and soap and whose voice had humped like a tether, of a shallow grave marked by a crooked stake and a stone that bore a name his tongue could not forgive. The memory came not in a single flash but in shreds, like a coat unraveling, a lullaby half remembered, a boot by the threshold, the sudden, obscene light of a lamp when men came for what they wanted. He shook the thought away because memory was a weather that could freeze a man in motion. He shook it like dust from his collar, as if physical motion could dispel the ache. The wind rode with them, picking the dust in long, resentful threads that kept time with the horse's stride, making the world look washed and older. And sometimes it carried with it scents, old leather, the iron tang of blood that never fully loses its scent, the faint sweetness of a wildflower pretending to survive, yea. And Cole listened to those smells the way a man counts the beats of a distant drum, cataloging danger and grace with the same tired hand. Claire rode behind him, shoulders drawn as if holding up the last of something, watching the land and watching him. Her eyes were quick to learn the contours of his face. She read him like a book with pages missing. She asked again. Once, when the sun had dipped and the sky had taken on the bruised purple of a wound that would not close, "Where are you taking us?" Her voice was small but steady, as if she had practiced the shape of questions that begged no impossible promises. Cole didn't look back right away. He let the horse pick its way between scrub and the shadows of low hills, as if biding time might authenticate the answer. Finally he said, simply, "Someplace better." They rode west until the town was nothing but a smear of boards and gossip behind them, the horizon a hard line that swallowed the sun. The land between Dry Creek and wherever hope might still be found was a ledger of everything that had been burned, grazed off, or simply forgotten, skeleton stumps of mesquite, the bleached strips of cattle that had once been counted, a sky so wide it made you feel both small and unsurpassed. And Cole Tanner kept his hand near the baby's blanket as if the sleeve could steady a future. "The child, Eli," Clara murmured once, half to teach the name to the wind and half to pin in with something softer than circumstance, was small and fierce in that way children are when the world leans wrong. Fingers curled like tiny tools, eyelids dark and slow, a mouth that opened from milk and wonder and closed against the taste of fear. Cole stole glances not because he was unfamiliar with responsibility, but because the sight of a living smallness unspooled something inside him he had tied up long ago, the memory of another child's laugh folded into sunlight, of a woman whose apron had smelled of bread and soap and whose voice had humped like a tether, of a shallow grave marked by a crooked stake and a stone that bore a name his tongue could not forgive. The memory came not in a single flash but in shreds, like a coat unraveling, a lullaby half remembered, a boot by the threshold, the sudden, obscene might of a lamp when men came for what they wanted. He shook the thought away because memory was a weather that could freeze a man in motion. He shook it like dust from his collar, as if physical motion could dispel the ache. The wind rode with them, picking the dust in long, resentful threads that kept time with a horse's stride, making the world look washed and older, and sometimes it carried with its scents, old leather, the iron tang of blood that never fully loses its scent, the faint sweetness of a wildflower pretending to survive, yea. And Cole listened to those smells the way a man counts the beats of a distant drum, cataloging danger and grace with the same tired hand. Claire rode behind him, shoulders drawn as if holding up the last of something, watching the land and watching him. Her eyes were quick to learn the contours of his face. She read him like a book with pages missing. She asked again. Once, when the sun had dipped and the sky had taken on the bruised purple of a wound that would not close, "Where are you taking us?" Her voice was small but steady, as if she had practiced the shape of questions that begged no impossible promises. Cole didn't look back right away. He let the horse pick its way between scrub and the shadows of low hills, as if biding time might authenticate the answer. Finally he said, simply, "Someplace better." They reached Eagle's Rest as the light thinned, a burned sign hanging crooked from two splintered posts, the name half-eaten by flame. The gate leaned like a tired sentinel and the wind moved through the place as if rehearsing memory. He dismounted with the slow, practiced motion of a man who keeps gesture cheap. His horse snorted and stamped, and Claire May felt the air change when he looked at the ruin, recognition in the set of his shoulders. Inside, the house was a hollow of blackened beams and dust, windows were empty sockets, a hearth gaped cold, and the floor was littered with warped nails and a child's toy cinched at the edge, evidence of a life suddenly unpaid for. No furniture remained. The quiet was dense, not empty but listening, as if the building held grudges in its boards and would not forgive easy passage of strangers seeking shelter. He walked the rooms with a touch that catalogued ruin, fingers over scorch, a hand on a sill, reading the place like a ledger and not flinching at what the page said. She watched and felt a shift in her understanding. His purchase at the auction had not been charity. It was an act aimed inward as much as outward, a man trying to placate something inside him. He turned and said, with a voice worn thin by things unsaid, "This was mine." and the words landed like an apology folded into fact. Clara heard ownership tangled with regret. His rescue was less of giving and more of reclamation, an attempt to stitch up a wound only visible to the man who bore it. Outside, the prairie breathed. Coyotes answered one another, and the last sun made the charred barn glow like a dull ember, while inside the house the air tasted of smoke and old promises. They made a small camp in the one room whose floor had held. He cleared glass and splinters with careful hands. She warmed a thin stew, and the baby slept in a blanket that had already known too many roads. At night he sat on the sagging porch and spoke in fragments about a ranch that had run cattle and summer laughter that once filled these rooms, never naming the men who burned it, only the nights that followed and the ache that drove him onward. She listened and realized his buying them was an attempt to stop history's wheel, to prevent another family from being written into a ledger, auctioned when debts were tallied and bullets and law was flexible. He worked the place with quiet hands, testing a joist before trusting it, knotting rope twice, rubbing a cinch until the grain shone. Small, stubborn labors that read like penance and like promise. Clara watched him and felt the odd relief of seeing guilt turned into craft. She thought that maybe some people pay for wrongs not with coin but with labor, rebuilding what they could not bring back. They ate thin stew by a lantern and spoke in fragments about seeds and fences, about how a roof could teach a child that the world might keep him. And the baby slept, warm against the rhythm of two hesitant heartbeats. Night held its breath. The house listened. In the morning they would measure wood and set the first nail, and the slow geometry of repair would become their answer to the cruelty that had come before. Morning promised no miracles but work, planks to lay, a roof to shore, a fence to stand between their small life and a world that too often counts people as collateral. He woke before dawn and began mapping repairs on a scrap of shutter, his pencil a metronome, and Clara, hands raw from scrubbing, moved beside him learning the cadence of a different kind of survival. There was no grand speech, no vow shouted across a crowd, only the honest clerkship of labor in the way two people who had been broken learned to hold a small thing together with the steady repetition of daily acts. If you've ridden this far with us, dip your hat and hit subscribe to keep the campfire burning. Every day, we bring another tale from the old frontier, of grit, loss, and the kind of courage the West was built on. Keep your powder dry and your heart wide open to the horizon. The house at Eagle's Rest began to tell its own story in the way planks creaked and nails protested, and Cole Tanner's past leaked out not on a torrent but in the careful drip of things he let fall into the quiet between hammer blows. He did not tell Clara everything in one breath. He never had that kind of faith in words, but he let fragments show themselves like bruises under thin skin, a name, a scar. The way he flinched when someone mentioned a ledger, the way his hands learned to measure a joist twice before trusting it. Cole, once a man who had moved like a shadow across other men's reckonings, once a gunslinger whose name people muttered to make a point, had tried to build a different life after the smoke cleared from a night that had cleared everything else. He had traded pistols for plow handles, countable scores for counted cattle, and for a handful of years he had known the small, stubborn redemption of mornings spent setting fence posts and evenings spent bending over a child's homework as if that routine could stitch open wounds. Then the men from Dry Creek had come with debts and lamps and a calculus that made human lives equivalent to coin, and the ledger had become a weapon. His wife had stood between them and the ledger, and later a child's laughter was only a memory and a small grave marked the horizon forever. He did not tell the story like a man seeking pity. He told it like someone who had been given a ledger of his own to balance, not with numbers but with acts. Claire listened in the close, intentional silence she had learned from years of listening for steps in the dark. Pieces fit into place for her like a puzzle. His tenderness with the baby, the particular way he checked doors at night, the haunted way he watched the road, and when, one twilight, she said the name of one of the men who had stood at the auctioneer's elbow, his face went still and something like ice slid through him. The men who had burned Eagle's Rest, the men who had come with the ledger and the lamps, were the men who now trafficked in desperation at Dry Creek. The circle tightened as if the prairie itself had a memory and it was pulling on both of their lives with the same thread. She saw then the ugly geometry of cruelty, debts paid in bullets, mediocrity made law, the same hands that had shoveled his family into the earth now pressing down on her, an echo-turned business model. That realization made the air in the burned-out rooms colder. It turned what might have been a simple rescue into something complicated and dangerous. Cole did not confess to a heroic blueprint when Clara demanded to know why he had chosen her in the square. He did not say, "I am noble." He told her, simply, that some debts you reckon with by standing where you once failed, that some acts of repair are meant to keep the same dark from once pooling again. His words were spare. He had learned the economy of speech in the courtroom of his conscience, and they landed like measured tools on a table. Clara's suspicion braided with understanding. She understood that his act of buying them had been less mercy than penance, less charity than an attempt at rewriting the ledger of his own life by preventing a repeat. The past, once a distant burned scar on his memory, became a near horizon as men from Dry Creek loomed in her mind, their faces mapped onto the men who had shot a life into chaos. She pictured their draws, the way they counted coin, the coldness in their eyes when they wore civility like a mask. In the small hours, Cole woke often, not from dreams but from memory, and once he found Clara sitting on the porch where the night kept vigil, the baby asleep in her lap, and she asked him if he feared they would come. He looked at the horizon where darkness pooled and said simply, "If they come, we'll meet them." There was no swagger in that sentence, no promise of blood, only a weary resolve, a man trying to place his life by a different compass. The days that followed were a study in the slow making of defenses, nails drawn, windows barricaded, patrols along the fence line, the rebinding of a rope that had once held a swing and now might need to hold a life. Yet even as he readied the ranch against a known cruelty, Cole moved with a softer hand toward the child than toward any tool. In his voice, in the way he adjusted the blanket, there was the careful tenderness of someone who had learned love only by the hard arithmetic of loss. Clara watched in sometimes, in the smallest hours before dawn. She allowed herself a thought that felt like treason. What if this man, whose name evoked gunpowder and grief, could be the keeper of a different future for her child? The answer was not destiny but work, rebuilding a house, mending what was broken, learning to stare down the same men who had once left too many graves in their wake. The ranch hummed with the kind of activity that is its own liturgy. Every hammer strike answered a childhood scream. Every repaired shutter was an edict against the ledger. Whispers of the past circulated like an illness. Neighbors who remembered Cole's darker days, rumors that his hands still smelled of old gun oil. But in the quiet at Eagle's Rest something else took root. The possibility that a man could rearrange his history not by erasing it but by facing it. And that the circle of cruelty could be broken not with more cruelty but with a stubborn, dangerous kind of mercy. Days passed like careful breaths at Eagle's Rest, each one a small insistence that the world could be coaxed back into order if you administered the right doses of work and patience. Clara moved through the rooms with the steady, stubborn diligence of someone stitching a life from rags, mending a sleeve, sewing a button, washing soot from a child's blanket until the fabric looked like memory. And Cole answered with his own liturgy of repair, hauling planks, setting joists, measuring twice and driving nails with the kind of exactness that read like atonement. The baby, Eli, a name Clara chose one evening when the sun lay like honey across the porch, began to unfurl in small, miraculous ways, a grin that surprised them both, a laugh that peeled like a bell against the charred rafters, fingers that found splinters and turned them into toys, a curiosity that chased dust motes into corners. For a few hours after dawn and before the sun's heat made the work slow and heavy, the house felt like a thing reborn. Sunlight fell through the patched window and made the floorboards look less like a grave and more like a stage. And for the first time since the auction, Clara allowed herself to hum under her breath, a tune that meant the world was, for now, tolerable. Their speech was sparse. Cole spoke in the man the economy that Jason had suggested, minimalist lines that carried heavy meaning. Pass me the spike, hold the beam, and sometimes, late at night when feet ached and the baby slept, you did right, he would say, not to claim heroism but to place a warm hand on the rawness of what they'd endured. They shared meals that were more ritual than luxury, thin stew, cornbread, coffee brewed until it tasted like a promise, and in the quiet between hammer strikes and the soft cooing of Eli, a fragile peace settled over their property like dust on an untouched shelf. But the peace was brittle because the world outside has a memory as deep as a canyon. Cole rose at dawn, always before the light softened the land, and rode the fence line with eyes that missed nothing. He checked gates. He listened to the wind's phrasing. He watched the road for silhouettes that might belong to men with ledgers and lamps. There were small signs, old tracks in the dust where a rider had paused to look back, a boot print not belonging to any neighbor, a coyote's howl that came too near the stock, and his hands carried that readiness like a second skin, fingers unconsciously brushing the place at his hip where a gun used to hang as a matter of course. Whispered rumors threaded through the nearby settlements, voices that said Dry Creek didn't forgive, that men with coin and cruelty kept accounts beyond the reach of law, and Clara felt her throat tighten each time a messenger came with a neutral face and eyes that had practiced not revealing much. She found herself checking the locks even when Cole was present, smoothing the blanket around Eli as if the fabric could ward off a ledger's appetite. The emotional rhythm of the house changed its key. Laughter still came, bright and honest, but it was punctuated by pauses where the air seemed to listen for an omen. Cole's own silences deepened. He would watch the horizon until the light doldrum lines formed at his temple like topography of a man who weighs danger in the bones. Occasionally he would speak of places where men could not be trusted, and he used those stories not to frighten but to teach. Clara learned where to hide supplies, how to make a fire that smoked more than it showed, where to dig a shallow trench in case the earth needed to swallow noise. Eli learned to trust hands that were steady and patient. He learned the cadence of Cole's voice and the shape of Clara's lap as if curriculum were also sanctuary. Yet even as fences were mended and the first seedlings were set along a newly cleared row, Cole returned each night with tiny changes in his face, less color, a furrow that had grown deeper, an exhalation that suggested he carried another burden alongside the wood, the sense that something, or someone, was coming. It moved in the way the wind shifted before a storm, a smell, an arrival in the periphery, a tightening that made the dog at the barn press itself low and unwilling to look out. He would stand at dusk and say nothing, and Clara would understand that silence better than any promise. They learned to sleep with one ear open, to take turns watching so that the baby could dream, and in those watches they saw the moral shape of their days, small acts of repair stacked against a history that kept trying to unmake them. The fragile peace held, but only because they guarded it with labor and attention and a kind of quiet faith that was almost reckless. Their laughter sharpened now by the knowledge that joy without vigilance was a luxury they could not afford, and so they loved with caution, mended with care, and waited with hands ready, because on their plains the past tends to come riding back in debts, once owed, asked to be collected. Lantern lights spilled across the long field like slow bleeding, a trio of small suns moving toward the Eagle's Rest until the porch steps cast long thin shadows and the charred boards threw back the light as if unwilling to be warmed. Clara woke at the sound, horses breathing, a soft clink of metal, and the house tightened like a fist. Every small movement measured, every breath counted. Cole was already awake, a man whose sleep carried the weight of unread ledgers. He moved through the house with the economy of a priest before an altar, one careful motion to check a window, another to lift the blanket over Eli's chest, and then he stepped out into the night, the boards cold under his boots, hand closing around the gun that for so long had been a memory and a tool and now sat heavy and alive. The riders came unevenly, 5 shadows resolved into 3, and when they halted at the edge of the property the lantern swung and threw faces into hard relief, faces Clara had seen before on the auction platform, faces that belonged to men who had learned to count human life as a line item. The leader dismounted with the lazy confidence of a man who assumed his world would not shudder. He had a smirk that folded cruelty and commerce into a single expression. Silas Greeley, named like a gravestone, looked over the ruined porch, let his gaze pass over the thin bundle of life sleeping behind the shutters, and said in a voice that made the air itself seem complicit, "You think you can just buy what we sell?" The question was a hinge. The men at his back shifted, boots whispering over gravel. Their eyes were small and bright with appetite. For a heartbeat the world waited, ears pressed to wood, cats frozen mid-lick, the baby breathing in and out like a slow tide, and then the night hummed with the possibility of violence, a low wire of sound stretched taut between intent and action. Cole stepped forward, not with the theatrics of a gunslinger seeking legend, but with the measured cadence of a man who had weighed what he would do and decided. His hand closed around the gun not because he wanted to show muscle but because he wanted to hold himself to a standard, restrained. The tremor in his fingers was not the quick jump of fear but the hard-earned shake of a man who had fought before and learned the price. His chest rose and fell like a bellows, and somewhere under that steadying breath was the memory of a woman's face and a small grave, things that taught him that firing first is an answer that leaves you hollow. "They're not for sale," he said, voice low as a drawbridge and twice as firm. The simplicity of the sentence landed in the dark like a stone. Silas laughed, a small, ugly sound, and suckled as if testing the strength of a jaw that once intimidated farms into surrender. "Ain't so simple, Tanner," he said, the name a blade. "You walk in buying them, thinking you can rewrite accounts. Men like us keep ledgers several ways." The phrase was business stressed as thread. Clara watched from behind the cracked window, a witness who had learned to read the faces of men like pages in a bad book. She saw a flicker in Cole then, the old gunfighter's calculation, quick eyes that measured distance, when, the slope of a porch and the angle of a shot. Yet what she felt most was the steadying that had come over him in the last months, the way his hands rested on the rail, the way his jaw set when he saw what cruelty had done to other people, the way his restraint had become a kind of armor as deliberate as any bulletproof vest. The three men closed in an inch, words and horses sniffing the air like predators. Silas's men leaned on their saddles, expecting the conversation to be a formality before coercion. Cole's reply was a sentence made of bone. "You took from me once," he said, and in that naming there was not only accusation but an accounting, memory pressed into a ledger of its own that would not be erased. Silas's smirk faltered. For a moment the flicker of lanterns painted surprise onto his face, as if he had not anticipated the past answering in the present. Then his smile returned, thinner, meaner. "You got a taste for charity now?" he taunted, and his men barked a laugh that tasted like crust. The air tightened. Clara felt the baby shift and held her breath as if inhaling might make the moment break. In the pause that followed, Cole thought of the nights he'd wished for more violence, for easier ends. He thought of how dead joy had felt a long time ago and how the taste of revenge had dulled into ashes. He thought of Eli's small hand, of the laugh that had come only last week and which had sounded to him like a miracle not meant for men who had known a ledger's bite. His grip steadied, not to fire but to show a resolve that would not let old debts re-enter the world's accounting without a reckoning. Outside, lantern light wavered. Inside, the baby slept, oblivious to history and law. Cole lifted his chin. "Leave now," he said, every syllable clean and unavoidable. It was not a plea. It was a choice offered, one last chance to avoid making more graves. The horses shifted. The men measured the horizon on the man standing between them and a child's life. And for an instant the night held its balance like a scale. The standoff cracked open like a struck bell the moment a single shot rang, sharp, obscene against the quiet, and everything that had been held in tense balance unraveled into light and sound. The first report sent birds up from the broken rafters and the horse nearest the porch screamed, hooves skittering. Lanterns swung and flamed like wounded stars, and then another shot answered it, and another, until the night was a machine of noise that spat smoke and iron into the small world of Eagle's Rest. Cole had not wanted this. He had not come back to the old life that answered insult with lead. But the past has a short, hard memory and it remembers men who failed to show up for reckonings. In the flash of muzzle fire he saw shapes he knew too well. The arc of a man's torso when hit, the way someone's eyes go wide and empty as a drawer, the instant anatomy of a fall. Clara covered Eli with her body as if wrapping cloth could muffle the sound. The baby's cry tore through the bedlam, a then piercing note that converted fear into something you could not ignore. Cole heard it and it drove him like a blade, a compass that pointed not to vengeance but to protection. The yard became a choreography of improvisation, men ducking behind stanchions, a lantern tumbling and painting the porch in red gold pools, the smell of burnt powder thick and close, horses rearing and dragging lines of dark across the dirt like rules being rewritten. Silas moved like a predator with teeth bared, laughing as bullets stitched the air, but then his laugh turned ragged as a wound opened along his arm and he clutched at it, blood slicking down his sleeve. Two others flanked him. One fell with a choke that sounded like a poor cough and went still. The other slumped over a rail as if sleep had finally taken him. And when the light steadied and the reports tapered into the sick, smoking silence, two men lay in the dust, not moving, eyes reflecting stars as if the sky had borrowed them. For a breath Cole stood with his gun still warm in his hand, the tremor he had felt earlier now a different animal, less restrained, more the aftershock of having let a thing happen that he had promised himself would never be the path he took again. And the weight of bodies before him felt like a verdict he had not asked to sign. Silas did not stay to be counted. He mounted with a hand pressed to the wound at his side, teeth gritted, and his horse lurched into the dark, leaving a trail that glowed faintly with his blood. The men who had come with him lay where they fell, the dust eating at their faces, and the lanterns, once small suns, were guttering, making their faces ghostly and half-finished. Clara sobbed then, a small, animal sound, and the baby wailed in a way that seemed to spill every small thing he had been promised back into the air. Cole moved among the bodies, not with triumph but with a kind of precise, reluctant ritual. He checked for breath. He closed lids. He pressed a hand to a cheek as if to test for warmth, his fingers sticky with the residue of powder and things that could no longer be smoothed. The smell of gun oil and iron sat in his nostrils like an accusation. He had wanted to be something other than a man whose hands made graves, and now his hands were doing the old work again. He thought, absurdly, of a small grave once dug across from a farmhouse, of a woman who had laughed once into the light, and the memory slid across him cold as a river. The frontier dispenses absolution rarely, if ever. It prefers ledgers, and where there are debts, men of a certain sort will attempt to collect with the currency they know. Cole did not exult in the deaths. Revenge had a sweetness for a moment, then it curled into hollowness. What settled over him now was a weary, heavy knowledge that violence begets violence, and that the child under Clara's shawl would sleep tonight with a future complicated by blood. He knelt by one of the fallen, felt for a pulse he could not find, and closed a hand over a face that had only yesterday been a smirk on the auction block. Around them, the land held its breath, as if the very prairie had learned not to be surprised by human cruelty anymore. Clara came to stand beside him, her hands shaking, eyes brimming with a sorrow that was equal parts relief and horror. Relief that Eli was unharmed, horror that the cost of such safety was 2 men's lives. She put a hand on his shoulder, and he felt it like a tether to something that was neither absolution nor condemnation but a simple, true fact. They had defended a child in a home, and now they would have to live with the ledger that Aucon wrote. Silas's distant retreating hoofbeats thudded like a dying drum, and Cole understood that this was not the end of the accounting. Someone in Dry Creek would hear and come, perhaps with lawyers or more guns, perhaps with a bounty and a hungry conscience. The moon slid behind a cloud, and for a long minute all that could be heard were the small sounds of the living, a baby's sobs, a woman's breath, the settling complaint of an old house. Cole sat back on his heels and let his head hang, not because he sought penance but because the frontier, in its austere moral arithmetic, had once again refused to let him walk away unmarked. Inside the dim shell of Eagle's Rest, the world had gone quiet except for the wind slipping through the broken boards and the shallow, uneven rhythm of breath that belonged to 2 people trying to make sense of survival. The air smelled of iron and smoke, the metallic ghosts of gunfire still clinging to the walls like a warning, and Clara's hands, steady despite exhaustion, moved over Cole's arm with a gentleness that seemed almost at odds with the ruin surrounding them. She tore a strip from her only clean dress, dampened it with boiled water, and pressed it to the wound, the blood blooming through the cloth in slow defiance of her effort. He flinched, not from pain but from the intimacy of care. A man used to dressing his own hurts finds it harder to stand still when someone else dares to see him bleeding. Outside, the yard was a map of chaos, 2 bodies cooling under the indifferent moon. A lantern turned over in the dirt, the dark slick of blood tracing its way toward the roots of the old cottonwood where Cole's horse stood shivering. Inside, the baby slept at last, as if unaware that his cries had once been the thread that kept his mother anchored to this world. Clara's face glowed in the low light, sharp with fatigue but softened by something else, an ache that wasn't fear anymore, but a slow, dawning comprehension of the man before her. She tied the bandage tight, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and said quietly, "You said you'd take us someplace better." The words were not accusation exactly, but they carried the weight of every promise she'd ever heard and lost. Cole didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted toward the window where moonlight cut through the dark in thin silver blades, and his jaw clenched like a man chewing on old regret. "I'm trying," he said finally, and the sentence broke open between them. Not a vow, not a defense, but a truth so simple it felt raw. Clara looked at him, really looked, and saw not the savior the town had whispered about, not the outlaw she'd feared might own her now, but a man worn thin by guilt and road dust, one who carried his dead with him like coin sewn into the lining of his coat. His eyes, when they met hers, were full of that old frontier contradiction, hardness built from too much loss and tenderness that refused to die despite it. She didn't say thank you, because gratitude felt misplaced in a night soaked with blood, but she didn't turn away either. For the first time since the auction, she felt the strange calm of standing beside someone who understood that rescue and redemption were rarely the same thing. Their silence was not awkward. It was the shared quiet of two souls who knew the cost of speaking too soon. Cole watched her fuss with the kettle, saw the small tremor in her hands when she poured water into a cup, and knew she was trying to disguise the way fear still lived in her bones. He wanted to tell her that he wasn't good, that men like him don't get to deliver miracles, that his saving her had been as much about rewriting his own mistakes as it was about giving her and the boy a chance. But words have a way of turning thin when you need them most, so he sat instead, the fire's light making his face older, and she sat beside him, their shoulders brushing in a way that felt more like confession than comfort. "You've lost people," she said after a while, not asking but knowing, and he nodded once, a small, deliberate motion that cracked open a silence large enough for both their ghosts to enter. The wind sighed through the house, bringing with it the faint scent of rain from somewhere far off, a storm building, maybe tomorrow, maybe in a week, and for the first time, Clara realized that storms didn't always come to destroy. Sometimes they came to wash the world clean. The baby stirred and whimpered. She rose to hush him, and when she turned back, Cole was still staring at the window, his good hand curled loosely around the edge of the table as if anchoring himself. "You did what you had to," she said softly, and though she wasn't sure if she meant tonight or years before, it didn't matter. He nodded again, almost imperceptibly, and something unspoken settled between them, something heavier than trust, lighter than forgiveness, but real enough to steady the air. In that quiet, where the fire's crackle spoke louder than confession, their bond began, not in gratitude or promise or any false purity, but in the honest, imperfect understanding that both had been broken by the same kind of world, and both had chosen, against reason, to keep living in it. Outside, the stars watched without judgment, and inside the burned-out ranch, two people, no longer strangers, not yet saved, sat close enough that the silence itself felt like mercy. If you've ridden this far with us, dip your hat and hit subscribe to keep the campfire burning. Every day, we bring another tale from the old frontier, of grit, loss, and the kind of courage the West was built on. Keep your powder dry and your heart wide open to the horizon. Silas rode back into Dry Creek before dawn, blood soaking through the torn sleeve of his coat, jaw clenched so tight that each breath came like a curse. The town, half asleep, stirred at the sound of his horse's uneven gait, and by the time he reached the saloon, the door swung open to reveal a few men who knew better than to ask questions before coffee or daylight. But tonight, or this morning, Silas's rage made both irrelevant. He threw a coin purse onto the table, its contents spilling out in a clatter that silenced the room, and said through gritted teeth, "Danner's alive." The name was a spell, an old ghost unburied, and every man in that room stiffened because Cole Tanner was not just a name in these parts. He was a legend with a body count, a man who'd once ridden under Silas's own command before deciding that blood bought nothing worth keeping. Silas's face twisted as he poured whiskey over his wound, hissing when it burned, then slammed the bottle down hard enough to crack the glass. "He killed my men," he growled, "and took what's mine. I want him brought in, or buried. Doesn't matter which." The bartender, a nervous man with more ears than courage, spread the news before the bottle hit the floor. By midday, the rumor had become a bounty, and by nightfall, the bounty had turned into a promise whispered across every poker table, every campfire, every outlaw's grin. $10,000 for Cole Tanner, dead or alive, and no questions about the widow or the child. The men who came sniffing around were old names with bad habits: Wyatt Coates, who had once shot a man for stepping on his hat; Amos Fitz, whose laugh sounded like a shovel hitting rock; and others, the old gang who had once called Cole brother before he'd broken from them and tried to build something softer than violence. They came now not out of loyalty but hunger, drawn by coin and by the satisfaction of rewriting the story that had left them in his shadow. Silas fed them whiskey and hate, painting Cole as a traitor who'd sold them out, a man who'd stolen blood money and gone soft. By the time the sun fell, they were saddled and ready, 8 riders heading out under a sky that promised no mercy. Back at Eagle's Rest, Cole felt the storm before he saw it. There are certain kinds of silence the land gives you when something's coming, a stillness too deliberate, too weighted, and he recognized it the way old soldiers recognized the smell of powder even decades later. He found Clara at the well, her sleeves rolled, her eyes distant, and when she asked what he was thinking, he didn't lie. "They'll come," he said, the words flat and sure. She stopped, bucket half raised, and looked at him as if searching his face for doubt. But there was none. He'd been running since the fire, running from graves, from names, from debts, and in her eyes, for the first time, he saw how small that running looked beside the life they'd built in scraps. He could pack the horse, leave under the cover of darkness, take her and the baby far from Dry Creek's reach, but running was a circle, not a road, and he was too tired to walk in circles anymore. "We could go," Clara whispered, not pleading, just offering the map of fear. "We could," he said, and meant it, but it wouldn't stop them. They'd just find someone else to bleed. He'd seen it too often. Violence was not satisfied by victory. It needed repetition. The men who hunted him were bound not by law but by the rhythm of revenge, and he was the one who had taught them the tempo. That night, he took inventory, bullets, rope, water, and moved through the ranch like a man preparing for confession, each gesture deliberate, each shadow noted. He oiled the rifle with slow precision, the same care another man might take to polish a wedding band, and as the fire in the hearth thinned to ash, he felt the strange calm of acceptance settle over him. Outside, the wind shifted, bringing the faint echo of laughter from somewhere far off, the kind of laughter that only comes from men who believe they're already owed the ending. Cole stepped to the porch, lit a cigarette, and let the smoke curl into the cold. He could almost hear the hoofbeats already, carried on the breath of the land. The thought didn't scare him. What frightened him, what truly carved its way into his ribs, was the part of himself that wasn't angry anymore, only ready. The day before the storm broke, the air over Eagle's Rest held the same weight as a church before confession, every sound smaller, every movement deliberate, the world itself pausing to take measure of what was about to be lost or saved. Cole Tanner moved through the house like a craftsman preparing for judgment, his hands steady, his mind narrowed to the clean simplicity of work, checking cartridges, setting lanterns in places where light could blind more than it revealed, hammering shutters into place so the wind couldn't betray them. The barn became a fortress, the corral a killing ground, and the open field that had once been the heart of his rebuilding now waited to be scarred again. Clara found him by the porch, sweat running down his jaw, and when he told her to pack the baby and ride east with it on, she only shook her head, her voice soft but unyielding. "You gave us a chance," she said. "Now it's our turn." There was no drama in her words, only the quiet conviction of someone who had finally grown tired of being moved by other men's fear. He wanted to argue, to tell her he'd already buried too many ghosts, but something in her gaze, steel and mercy twined, made him stop. So they worked together in silence. She filled buckets with water from the well, lined up jars of kerosene, wrapped the baby's cradle in cloth to muffle sound. Night fell without preamble, the sky bruised purple and black, and the first torchlight appeared on the ridge. 6 riders, their silhouettes sharp against the low stars, the wind carrying with it the sound of hooves like a drumbeat counting down the inevitable. Clara took Eli into the cellar, whispering a prayer not for safety but for courage. Cole stood in the doorway of the ruined ranch, rifle in hand, the heat of the lantern beside him painting his shadow long and skeletal against the wall. The riders fanned out, the glow of their torches turning the field into a wavering sea of gold and shadow. Silas Greeley rode at the front, his arms still bound, eyes burning with a fever that was half vengeance, half disbelief that any man could stand against the ledger he represented. "Denner," he called, his voice carrying like a sermon. "You can come out clean, or I can write your name in fire." Cole stepped forward into the open, calm as a man walking to a gallows he built himself. "You've done enough writing," he said, his voice ablaze in the dark. The first shot came from the left, wild, impatient, and answered by Cole's rifle, a single, measured crack that dropped the shooter where he sat. Chaos unfurled then, torches hurled, glass shattering, the barn catching first, flames licking up into the dry beams like tongues of judgment. Cole moved like muscle memory, no flourish, just precision. One shot, another, a duck behind the trough, a roll through dust that bit into his wounds and reminded him he was still alive. The world became a strobe of firelight and smoke, every breath drawn through grit and fear. Silas dismounted, gun in both hands, stalking forward with the grin of a man who thinks fate has always been on his side. Cole heard Clara's voice faint through the cellar boards, Eli's soft whimper, and that sound cut through the haze sharper than gunfire. He rose from behind the half-broken fence and met Silas in the open yard, the two men circling each other through the smoke and the screaming wood. "You always thought you were better than the rest of us," Silas spat, raising his pistol. "No," Cole said, voice low, steady, "just tired of being worse." The flash lit both faces at once, two men who had started in the same darkness and chosen different exits, and when the echo died, Silas was on his knees, clutching at his chest, the fire's reflection dancing in his eyes like some cruel benediction. Cole watched him fall, the gun slack in his hand, and for a long, shuddering moment, he felt nothing at all, no triumph, no grief, just a hollow quiet where rage had once lived. The barn collapsed behind him, sparks rising like a final psalm to a merciless sky. When the last of the riders broke and fled into the night, Cole dropped to his knees, breathing smoke and blood, the earth cool against his palms. Clara found him there, soot-streaked, her face pale in the light of the dying flames, and without a word, she reached for his hand. Together they sat in the ashes, the baby's faint cry threading through the silence like proof that something still lived, and Cole Tanner, gunslinger, rancher, sinner, closed his eyes and understood that what he had fought for was not revenge at all but redemption, the kind that doesn't come clean or easy, the kind you earn in one scar at a time beneath a sky that forgets no one. Dawn came slow and uneven, dragging light over a landscape that no longer belonged to the living. The fires at Eagle's Rest had burned themselves down to coals, sending up thin threads of smoke that twisted like ghosts into the pale sky, and the silence that followed was heavy, not peace, but the stunned quiet of aftermath, when even the wind forgets how to move. Cole Tanner stood in the yard that had once been his refuge, his boots sunk in blackened earth, the rifle hanging limp in his hand. His shirt was soaked through with blood, some his, some not, and his breath came in short, uneven pulse that scraped the inside of his chest. The house leaned drunkenly, the porch half collapsed, the well's rope burned through. Across the yard, Silas Greeley lay sprawled in the dirt, one arm thrown wide as if in accusation, his coat open, a red stain spreading like an unpaid bill across his ribs. The others who had come with him were gone, too dead where they fell, the rest scattered into the hills. But Silas, stubborn as the dead he represented, refused to die quickly. When Cole walked toward him, each step was a conversation with pain, and when he finally reached the man who'd once been his brother in arms, Silas turned his head with the weak defiance of someone who still thought words could outlast blood loss. "You," he rasped, a wet sound catching in his throat. "You could have been rich." His voice cracked on the last word, and he coughed, the sound harsh in the still morning. Cole looked down at him, eyes shadowed, the faint tremor in his hand betraying exhaustion more than anger. "Rich in what?" he asked quietly, the question more confession than mockery. Silas blinked, as if trying to see the point, but found nothing there but sky. For a moment, Cole almost pitied him, the man who'd never learned the difference between owning land and owning peace, between counting coins and counting graves. "You think it matters?" Cole said, not raising his voice, not wasting energy on hate. "You think there's anything left to buy?" The sun pushed over the ridge then, its light cutting through the smoke, catching on the edges of broken glass and spent shells, painting the wreckage gold as if to mock the idea of wealth. Silas tried to laugh, but the sound died halfway up his throat. Blood filled the space instead, bubbling through clenched teeth, and when it stopped, his eyes stayed open, fixed on something far beyond the charred remains of Eagle's Rest. Cole crouched down beside him, closed those eyes with two fingers, and for a long moment didn't move. He thought of the man Silas had once been, before greed and guilt had eaten him hollow. He thought of nights when they'd shared whiskey under a desert moon, younger, dumber, believing that violence could build something lasting. The truth was that men like Silas never changed. They only grew tired enough to call their cruelty by other names. When Cole stood, the movement nearly pulled him to the ground. His body screamed, his leg gave out, and he had to brace himself against the fence post that still somehow stood. Behind him, the baby cried from inside the half-burned house, a small sound, alive, stubborn, undeniable, and Clara's voice followed, soft, cracked, calling his name like an anchor. He looked back once, saw her framed in the doorway, her hair ash-streaked, her dress torn, the baby in her arms, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight of something like grace pressing against the ache of survival. He holstered the pistol with emotion that felt final, as though setting down not just a weapon but an entire history, and limped toward the house. Each step left a faint print in the soot, a record of passage, and behind him, the smoke from the dying fires rose straight and true into the morning air. When he reached the porch, Clara's eyes met his, wide and wet and full of questions that had no answers. "It's done," he said simply, voice barely more than air. She looked past him to the yard, saw the bodies, the ruin, and nodded once. No more words were needed. Cole sat down on the step, the dawnlight washing over him, and pressed a hand against the wound in his side. Blood seeped through his fingers, warm and steady, but his expression was calm. He was so very tired, not just of pain or violence, but of the cycle itself, the endless arithmetic of loss. The baby whimpered, and Clara hushed him, and Cole watched the horizon for a long time before saying, almost to himself, "Guess I finally paid what I owed." The wind shifted then, carrying away the last of the smoke, and for a fleeting instant, Eagle's Rest, broken, burned, bloodied, looked almost clean. The sun rose slow over Eagle's Rest, pale and deliberate, spilling light across the landscape that no longer belonged to night. Smoke lifted from the ruins of the barn like a prayer that refused to dissolve, curling upward through the early chill, carrying with it the ghosts of gunpowder and burnt timber and men whose names would soon become just another rumor whispered in the saloons of Dry Creek. The earth was blackened where the fire had kissed it, and the house, half standing, half surrender, creaked as it settled, its wounded boards breathing in rhythm with the dawn. On the porch sat Cole Tanner, battered, blood still drying on his sleeve, the sharp edges of exhaustion making him look older than the sun behind him. His hands, once so sure, now trembled as they wrapped around a tin cup of coffee Clara had managed to scavenge from the wreckage. He stared at the horizon, at the low line of hills glowing gold, the sky stretching open like an old wound that maybe, just maybe, could start to heal. Behind him, inside what was left of the house, Clara sat with Eli cradled in her arms, the baby's small fingers tangled in her hair, his breathing soft and even against her chest. For the first time since the auction, the sound of his sleep wasn't weighted with fear. She watched the light crawl across the floorboards, cutting through dust motes and remnants of ash, and she thought that maybe this was what survival really looked like. Not triumph, not justice, just the simple, trembling act of continuing. She stepped out onto the porch, the baby wrapped in the same torn blanket that had carried him through every mile of their running, and when Cole turned to look at her, the sunlight caught his face, revealing every line carved there by regret and road dust and the faint, impossible hope that he could still be something other than what the world had made him. He shifted, wincing, and nodded toward the east where the land seemed to open forever. "You'll need a new start," he said, voice rough, quieter than the wind. "Someplace far from here." The words carried no demand, no expectation, just the weary understanding of a man who had seen too much to believe peace could grow from the same soil that had tasted blood. Clara looked down at him, her shadow stretching over the porch boards, her smile small but steady, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than safety. "So will you," she said, and the way she said it made him look up as though he'd forgotten for a moment that such a thing was possible. The sun crept higher, washing the ranch in light that softened the scars of the night before. It caught on the curls of smoke, on the glint of spent shell casings, on the fine red dust that clung to everything, making even ruin look almost sacred. Cole's gaze followed the line of the horizon, where the hills met the sky, and for the first time in years, he didn't see a place to escape to. He saw a world still turning, indifferent but alive. He thought of Silas, of the bodies he'd buried at the edge of the field before the light came, of how easily men traded their souls for something as small as pride or coin. He thought of his own debts, of the wife and child whose names he'd said to no one, and of the promise he'd broken a lifetime ago, that he'd build something worth leaving behind. Maybe this, Clara, the baby, the fragile life trembling toward dawn, was that something, even if he would never be part of it for long. Clara came to sit beside him, setting the baby gently between them. Eli reached out, clutching at Cole's finger, and that single touch carried more weight than all the ledgers, all the blood, all the miles behind them. The land smelled of ashen wet earth, the air sharp with morning, and for a few heartbeats the three of them existed in a rare kind of stillness, unpromised, undeserved, but real. "Where will you go?" she asked finally, her voice barely louder than the wind's breath. Cole didn't answer right away. He watched the sun climb until it burned the last of the smoke away, until color returned to the world in hesitant strokes. "Wherever mercy still rides," he said at last, and though the words were almost a whisper, they hung between them like scripture. Clara smiled, faint but full of knowing, and the baby stirred, eyes fluttering open just as the light reached them. Behind them, the shadows of the house began to shrink. Ahead, the day stretched wide and uncertain, and for the first time in a long time, that uncertainty felt like grace. The morning held its breath as if the world itself wanted to witness an ending that might also be a beginning. Sun bled slowly over the low hills, washing the blackened timbers of Eagle's Rest in a pale gold that softened ruin into memory, and Cole Tanner mounted with the economy of a man who carries far more than saddle and rifle. He carried ash in his hair, guilt in the slope of his shoulders, and a small, flaring hope tucked under his coat like a contraband. Clara stood at the fence with Eli cradled against her chest, the baby's breath warm and even, his tiny hand curled around a finger that smelled faintly of smoke and coffee and the peculiar sweetness of survival. She had not asked him to stay, nor had she begged him to go. She had only made a choice with the kind of clarity earned in nights of hunger and days of work, to keep what she had been given and to let mercy do its quiet work elsewhere. Around them the land exhaled. Coyotes wove calls through the scrub. A neighbor's dog barked twice and fell silent. The distant road shimmered where heat and motion argued, and as Cole swung his leg over his horse, he looked back once, long enough for every scar on his face to read like an epitaph, and saw not gratitude exactly but the steadier thing that comes after the danger has passed, understanding. He tipped his hat in a gesture that was less a farewell than a benediction. Claire lifted her chin and answered with a smile that did not pretend the world had been made right, only that they had chosen to keep living in it anyway. The horse moved off with the sound of a pen on paper, each hoof fell a line in a ledger that no one wanted to read aloud. He rode without haste, not fleeing but following a road that had no map, and dust rose in his wake like pages being turned, carrying with it the scent of burned oak and something softer, the memory of a cradle song, the echo of a baby's laugh that had once been drowned out by sorrow. As he rode, Cole thought of the small arithmetic that had governed his life, debts counted in bullets, favors tallied with teeth, and how today, in the quiet that followed violence, he had traded one kind of ledger for another, the unglamorous account of repair, of putting boards back, of teaching a child that roofs can hold and hands can heal. He did not look for redemption in the face of the rising sun. Redemption, he had learned, was not a destination but a manner of travel, slow, deliberate, a string of small acts that refused to be cruel. Behind him, Eagle's Rest shrank into the outline of a life he had tried to build and lost and now, in its ruin, found a reason to leave. Clara watched until his silhouette was no more than a ripple on the horizon, and then she turned back to the house with the pragmatic tenderness of someone who had been given time. Time to plant a row, to sew a coat, to teach a child a name. She hummed under her breath, the sound of fragile stitch that drew the torn world a little closer, and Eli opened his eyes and smiled at the light as if the morning itself knew to be gentle. Neighbors would talk. Dry Creek would rewrite the scene in a dozen different tongues, some making Cole a saint, others making him a fool. But for the people who mattered here, the ledger had flipped. What was owed was now tented and bred in a roof that might, slowly, learn to be kind. As the rider faded, the wind caught a sound and carried it. No words, only the mood of a promise left unspoken and therefore truer. Mercy travels on the back of those who choose to carry it. It does not arrive for sale. The road ahead was long and the world would keep asking for payment in its own coarse coin. But for a moment, long enough to count the baby's fingers, lights built over the land that had known darkness so well, and everything else held possibility. Clara set Eli against her shoulder and looked once toward the place the dust had eaten, and in that glance was the simple, terrible hope that one man's choice might be a small lever against an indifferent world. The sun climbed, and with it the day began, a day of mending and of stories that would be told not for glory but so the next child might sleep a little easier. And somewhere on the ridge the lone rider rode on, Not into legend, but into labor, into a life where mercy is not a one-time purchase, but the slow, stubborn work of keeping another soul from being auctioned to the highest cruelty. If this story stirred a memory or two, saddle up with us again. Hit subscribe and help keep these old frontier tales alive. Out here, every name, every trail, every sunset still matters. So till we meet again, friend, keep your hat tipped to the past and your heart pointed west.